Jason adjusted his tie, glancing at the clock on his office wall. One more. The last interview of the day, and he could finally wrap things up. His company, a marketing firm that had exploded in growth over the last 3 years, needed a senior strategist. He'd spent hours reviewing candidates, but none had stood out. A knock at the door. His assistant peeked in. "Sir, the final candidate is here." Jason nodded, flipping open the next resume without bothering to read the name. "Send them in." The door opened. And time stopped. His fingers, which had been drumming idly against the desk, stilled. His breath caught just for a fraction of a second before he schooled his expression into perfect neutrality. Emily. His ex-wife. She looked almost the same as she had 3 years ago, polished, confident, dressed in a sleek black blazer, her dark hair pulled into a flawless bun. But the second her eyes met his, all the color drained from her face. The folder in her hands trembled. She took a single, unsteady step forward. Jason watched the emotions flicker across her face, shock, disbelief, then raw, unfiltered panic. He let her drown in it for a heartbeat longer before finally speaking. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, as if she were just another stranger. "Please. Have a seat." Emily hesitated. For the first time in all the years he'd known her, she looked uncertain. Lost. She finally sat, gripping the edges of her folder like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. "I didn't know you worked here," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason leaned back in his chair, tilting his head just slightly as he studied her. "Work here?" A slow smirk curled at the edge of his lips. "I own this company, Emily." Her eyes widened. He saw the way her throat moved as she swallowed. He knew exactly what she was thinking. The last time they'd stood in the same room, he'd been a struggling entrepreneur, barely keeping his startup afloat. She'd wanted security. Luxury. A life he couldn't give her then. So she had chosen someone else. "Well," Jason said, flipping through her resume with deliberate disinterest, "this is unexpected." Emily stayed silent, her knuckles white around the folder. He let the silence stretch, let her squirm. "Then, you have experience," he mused. "Let's talk about that. Why did you leave your last position?" Emily straightened, forcing composure into her voice. "Company downsizing." Jason tapped his fingers against the desk. "Downsizing," he echoed. "A lie." She flinched. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd kept tabs on her, just as she'd secretly kept tabs on him. After their divorce, her life had unraveled. The man she'd left him for, Mark, had seemed perfect at first. Wealthy. Established. Everything Jason hadn't been. Until he wasn't. Controlling. Manipulative. And, in a cruel twist of fate, unfaithful. By the time she realized her mistake, it was too late. Jason had moved on. And she? She'd been left with nothing. Now, sitting across from him, she understood just how far he'd climbed and how far she'd fallen. "Jason," she whispered. "This isn't personal," he cut in, his voice cool. "This is business. And in business, trust is everything." She inhaled sharply. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. The interview was over. "I appreciate your time," he said, polite, detached. "Good luck with your job search." Emily opened her mouth,